Hi there, huge welcome to Produce, Mix, Fix and Conquer. My name's Rich Steve Beck. I'm the founder of this community and we're super excited to be having on our next guest. So our next guest has worked with Tony Iommi, he's worked with Black Sabbath, Rick Rubin, Dio, Cradle of Filth, amongst many other artists. He's also worked in the pop world with Britney Spears, and he's also gone down the route of reggae with UB40 as well. So without further ado, Mr. Mike Exeter. Hey, Mike.
Hey, Rich, how are you?
I'm really good. How are you doing?
I'm all right, thank you. I'm very good. Very
Fantastic.
pleased to be here on this miserably thundery, humid evening.
Absolutely. Indeed. I know, super excited to explore your journey and maybe
Right.
have a chat with you about your work process as well with all the mixing gear and your
Okay.
amazing outboard gear you've got there as well, if that's good with you.
hmm Yeah, it'll be a
Fantastic.
pretty short chat on that one.
Well, see how we go.
Yeah, no,
Absolutely.
it's all good.
Amazing. Oh,
Cool.
brilliant. For those of you that don't know as well, Mike is also an amazing interviewer himself on Record Producer as well, and also interviews some amazing guests. So
Mm.
maybe a bit of a change for you, been the one that's been interviewed as well, Mike.
Yeah, I'm starting to get used to this stuff because I do some podcast things, and I'm just happy. I like spreading the word and just helping anybody out if possible.
Yeah.
It's like uh, there's a lot of information out there that needs to get to people on many levels. So this is really good. I love what you're doing.
Oh, thank you so much. Really appreciate that. That means the world. Mike, so like we've done with the rest of our guests, I'd like to really start at the beginning. So, growing up, what type of music were you listening to as a kid, and what music did your parents get you into?
Fortunately, I had hip parents. That I still have hip parents, but they actually were lucky enough to see the Beatles when they weren't headlining. So that just goes to show how old they are. So dad and mum really into rock and roll and stuff, and dad started to get into the vinyl stuff, the real hi-fi things, which happened to coincide with Dark Side of the Moon coming out. So I was exposed to Dark Side of the Moon at the tender age of 6, and that sort of continued through. I think it was just before my 10th birthday. Animals came out by Pink Floyd, and that was it. That was my favourite album there and then established. And I listened to loads of stuff that had keyboard players. I was learning the piano by the time I was 7,
Oh wow.
and I remember Dad coming home with an album which had this bloke in a gold cape on it, surrounded by synthesizers, going, "This guy's a bit useful. You should listen to him." And that was my discovery of Rick Wakeman, who I still love, but I have to say I couldn't abide Yes, particularly. That wasn't my sort of prog. I was Genesis and that kind of thing. So it was a fairly sort of hippie start to my life, but I was studying classical music and I love pop as well. When ELO came out with Mr. Blue Sky, it just happened to hit at the right time for me. So I then had the two extremes of prog and orchestral pop, and then everything in between. Yeah.
Fantastic. So
Yeah.
good. Thanks so much for that, Mike.
Mm.
Tell us as well. So, was piano? Was that the first instrument that you picked up? Is
No,
that
it
right?
was
Or
recorder. Back in those days, we all used to get taught the recorder, and it was a hideously screeching instrument. The My older brother was 2 years. He's 2 years older than me, and he started learning it first, and he probably will mind, but he was absolutely crap at it. And so, Mum and Dad were very frightened when I came home with a recorder. But then they realised that I was actually getting tunes out of it, and soon I was able to progress to the next size up, and it was that really showed that I had some kind of interest in it. My granddad on my mum's side was a really amazing pianist as well, so he was really nurturing. So yeah, it was a musical family in as much as we loved listening to music. I mean, I remember Christmas Day when Dad was given Night of the Opera by Queen, and we all sat around
wow.
listening to that in the evening. You know, there's all. I'm just lucky. I'm sure there's all this stuff is happening now in the world to younger generations, but I'm really lucky that I'm kind of, I lived those years with those kinds of bands that are still influencing everybody. And you know, that stuff like Queen and Floyd, they're incredible. So
absolutely. Yeah. And do you think, thanks so much for that, do you think that legends can still happen like they used to back in the day? Do you think the legends are still out there?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it just depends on how it hits an audience and what the response is. I think people become known. It's the way that music works, isn't it? It's the way that that anything creative works. It touches an emotion that you respond to. And I mean, sitting here, I can picture being given those albums. I can picture that Christmas evening. I can picture driving past Battersea Power Station with my dad just after Animals had come out, going, that's on the cover. All of these things, you put yourself in places. I can probably tie in every single piece of music I know to somewhere or someplace in time. And I think it's that effect that it has on a group of people that becomes a movement that then somebody does become legendary. I'm not sure if anybody's, I don't know, are people legends in their lifetime at the moment? Are we producing those kinds of legends? I don't know. I would say, probably quite controversially, Hans Zimmer is a legend.
Agreed.
And I know a lot of people take great offense to that, but that's because they're not as good as him and not as successful. So, so I think the world was a smaller place back then, and there was an opportunity for people to really shine. And now there's a lot of noise out there, and it's much, much harder to get through that noise. I would say Adele is probably one of the biggest legends that's come through. Probably Billie Eilish as well. You know, that's but I'm sure we'll get lots of hate mail for that.
Well, you know, let's explore that. You know, with like Phineas, you know, he breaks loads of rules that he probably shouldn't do, and yet it became one of the most, you know, Billie Eilish became one of the most popular artists of our time. So, you know, is it okay that he's broke those rules? It appears it's okay that he's broke those rules.
Of course it is, because what's to say that he's actually breaking any rules? I mean, what he did was he enabled his sister to get the creativity that she needed to suddenly touch a generation of people. It's like, it happens from time to time. I was lucky. I lived through the 80s. I saw those fashions. I saw what Madonna did to young girls in terms of like the influence and the adoration, adulation. Same thing with Billie. The same thing with like Avril Lavigne, what she did. It's really important that people can tag themselves with some identity. I mean, what was I listening? It was difficult for me because punk came out when I was 13, and I didn't get into that. So suddenly I'm part of the I Hate Pink Floyd generation of punk. You know, the famous T-shirt that the Pistols wore. And it just wasn't my thing. But it wasn't quite as divisive back then. It wasn't so absolute. We didn't get a chance to have hate campaigns on social media because there wasn't any.
No.
You know, it would be a nasty letter written to the NME, and that would come out a week later. By then, you'd forgotten what the fuss was about. You know, so it was a slower pace of things, and I think that's something about the way that things get a chance to develop more in the older days. You know, people rose to the top because they put a lot of bloody work in.
Yeah,
they really did. So, I don't know. I think Phineas has done a great thing, and to be honest, it wouldn't matter if he was using, Garage Band, or for the Americans, Garage Band, or whatever, anything. Just as long as you get your creativity out. You'll probably discover I'm not really a gear slut. Oh no, we're not allowed to call it gear sluts anymore. That's right. I'm not a gear space person.
Yeah. Yeah, completely. And it's a sign of the times that everything's obviously changing in relation to people aren't maybe using as much gear now, though. I suppose a lot of people tend to be using plugins, but I know that I've talked to a few engineers over the last few months, like pros like yourself, and they've all said that a lot of people have said that it's the fact they use outboard gear now to capture those amazing moments and those amazing sounds with those amazing mics and outboard that they use. But yet I've noticed a lot of people, I don't know about yourself, but a lot of people seem to be mixing now in the box rather than actually using outboard. But how do and obviously maybe I'll have a chat about the artists that you work with in a minute, but with your process, are you hybrid? Are you in the box? Are you mainly out analog? How do you tend to work, Mike?
Mixing, I'm completely in the box. I have been for about God, I'd like to say about 12, 13 years. Really came out of the fact that I didn't have a studio. I had to be. I had a home set up, and I think the first thing I mixed that got released would have been around. Oh God, actually, it's probably about 18 years ago. Maybe 16 years ago was an album that I actually mixed on a PowerBook G4 1 gigahertz with a 002 rack, and it was Pro Tools LE, and it only had 32 tracks active at the time, so I had to keep going. On the bigger mixes, I had to go freeze the drums or make a bounce of the drums, and then use the 2 tracks of the drums and build the rest of the mix. And then if something needed rebalancing in the drums, I'd have to mute a few things, and it was a real faff. But it got released, and it did all right. A friend of mine, Pedro Ferreira, had to do exactly the same thing with a 001 when he mixed, I believe, in a thing called Love by the Darkness. Nobody cared what it was on. It was just like, this is great. So I'm completely in the box for mixing. If I'm in a studio, and I have clients there, and because I can't have clients here, this is my home, but I mix on Yukon surfaces, and they are brilliant. If I'm in a studio, I'm generally on an SSL, AWS or Duality, but I'm using them as a control surface at that point. And so it's amazing. A Huey system with an iPad accessing all the other Yukon functions, and I just need to be on a surface. It's an eyes closed, intuitive process mixing. It's not about looking at a screen. That's why my screen's over there, not here. But when it comes to recording, it's about getting the best sounds captured that you can, making decisions, and sort of leaving no stone unturned to capture whatever you can. It's terrible missing a moment of magic because you weren't ready. It's really important to always be in record, and it doesn't matter a flying fuck if you've just slightly got the preamp gain a bit too low or a bit too hot. There's sometimes moments of magic that will sustain. I mean, I know there's a bit on "You Ought to Know" by Alanis Morissette. She nails the first chorus, and it's like, oh, Glenn Ballard wasn't ready for that. It doesn't matter. I just distorted the rest of the track a bit. I mean, I always used to laugh about these things because everybody gets so gear obsessed. It's like, oh, that album can't be good. It was a big thing. It was a big thing that Glenn Ballard did it all on ADATs. It's like, yeah, so what? It was the thing he captured it on. I'm recording. He had a home studio with a Euphonic CS2000 in it. That was a couple $100,000 console. None of that matters. It was the fact that he was in a songwriting mode and they were capturing what Alanis was doing, and that became one of the biggest albums. Talk about a legend. That inspired some people. That was kind of around 1994, I think.
Yeah, was it Jagged Little Pill? Yeah. Great album.
The only female ever to have gone on to play God in a movie, as far as I know.
Dogma. Yeah. Mate. Dogma was a great film. Yeah.
One of the funniest. I mean, Alan Rickman again. There's a legend.
Yeah.
But it's all this kind of stuff. This is the thing that is important to get across to everybody. Is it's like, imagine missing those moments. Imagine just thinking, oh, hold on a minute, I'm not ready. You've
Yeah.
got people in a room, they're just like, why have we turned up to and sat around for 2 hours, you know?
Absolutely.
So I was always in record from an early day, or from the early days, and just making sure that it's like that old adage of the best camera is the one you have with you, the best microphone is the one you have, and the best recorder is the one that works.
Absolutely
agree. I'm all about stuff that doesn't let me down.
Yeah. Amazing.
So, yeah, I'm quite obsessed with not obsessing over gear.
that's so.
You'll find out that I'm a hypocrite, because I will tell you some of the stuff. No, I'm not. No, absolutely not. But it's really important that that you don't get hung up on it, because gear won't do the job for you.
Absolutely. And thanks so much for that, Mike. So I've seen as well, though, that you said about I think on a website or an interview that you've done about Guerrilla Recordings. You really enjoy recording bands in their own space, in their own habitat as well. So tell us more about that.
Well, that again, it's I'll preface it with the idea that anybody can moan about why they haven't done something and blame it on something or someone else, and I think you've got to take account for your own actions, and you've got to realize that that ultimately we always used to say that laptop I've got has more power than what used to go up in the space shuttle. I mean, we all know the one about what put the Apollo space capsule in, on the moon. But now we've got watches with more power than that. There is no excuse to not get something done. So back in the earliest stages, I think we can probably blame Focusrite for bringing out the Octoprix Mark I at a similar time to when Mark of the Unicorn had brought out the 828, and Avid shortly after brought out the 002 rack. They suddenly gave us the ability to have a Firewire interface with 8 or 4 preamps, and then an optical input that we could put another 8 preamps in. So I could go and record a full drum kit and guide tracks with 12 inputs in a lockup. And I started buying enough cheap microphones to enable me to do it. And oddly enough, some of those microphones are still in daily use because they just work. I get a load of shit for using Sennheiser 604s on toms, top and bottom, and using a Y lead, which basically pops the bottom mic out of phase or reverses the polarity to the top mic, and then joins them together and goes down one mic lead. Because when I was doing stuff in rehearsal rooms, I only had 8 mic inputs I could use for drums. So it's like, well, I ain't going to do top and bottom miking and use up like 6 inputs. I'll just use 3. And then I've got kick, snare, and overheads, and anything else that I can fit in. Probably one extra track. Yeah, it was probably a mono room at the time. So it's like I found things that worked, and I've really just I find there's no reason to deviate from that unless something is really going to stand up and smack me in the face and go, I'm better than everything you've ever done. I'm just going to keep using the reliable stuff. There's a hell of a lot of reinventing the wheel goes on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're so right as well. I think it's so fun as well to sometimes try new ideas out, but the old ways, or say old ways, but like the ways how well it's 60s, completely they came back in the 50s and the 60s, all these like recording techniques, they work, and there's a reason why people still crave all the old mics. We were in a studio, I was helping produce an artist a couple of weeks ago, and they were using an AKG 24, beautiful mic. It was great, but it's from like 1963 or whenever it was, and it still works. It's like, what the fuck?
Yeah,
I mean, amazing.
It's amazing, really. I talk to people about vocal recording because it's still the one thing that transcends every genre except for instrumental music, obviously.
Yeah.
So anybody who gives a shit about recording should learn how to record vocals. Now, it doesn't get any more complicated in its real simple form than sticking a mic in front of someone making a noise.
Yeah.
It's about how the microphone sounds compared to maybe another microphone that you may have in your arsenal or not. If it's the only microphone you've got, you can make it work. And it's, if you've got no comparison to anything else, don't worry about it. But are you capturing that raw emotion? Who's to say that a 57 isn't the best microphone? I know damn well that Paul Rodgers spent most of his life recording on 57s, and I bet it's not the best sounding mic on him, but who's to decide what's best? He was comfortable when he used it. I know plenty of singers that still use 87s because they came up in the 80s when the 87s were pretty prevalent, and they like the look of what they're seeing.
Yeah.
Now, I could stick any number of the new breed of vocal mics, which apparently sound amazing, in front of someone, and if they don't like the look of it, they aren't going to perform.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
I'm all for everybody giving it their best and coming up with stuff. And my other point, which goes to it, is the just moving a microphone around a little bit, especially on a richly harmonically complex source like a 4x12, does way more than testing half a dozen different mics, 20 preamps, 15 EQs, and 6 types of converter. Because I guarantee you'll have lost the guitarist by that point. But you can get an immense amount of tonal variety just moving that microphone around. And people should do more of that.
So what's your thoughts? Thanks for that, Mike. That's amazing. What are your thoughts on like the robot mic? I don't know what it's called, like where
the
robot actually moves the mic. Yeah. What's your thoughts on those?
I initially took the piss out of it because I was like, you lazy fuckers. And then I used one and I was like, oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
That's exactly what you should be hearing. You get a similar sense of it. If ever you've used any of the UAD cab things, you know, so like you've got your Engels and your bass room cabs, or well, actually the Engels don't, but like the bass cab, the bass room cab. Quite a lot of things like the Neural DSP, 2 notes, who are the other ones? STL.
Yeah.
You get a real sense. Those aren't bullshit. Those aren't just pictures of a microphone. Those are what it sounds like when you move a microphone a little bit. And I put a 57, a friend of mine's got a Dynamount, and I put 57 on a cab, and I just started moving it, and I was like, oh my God, wow, I'd never have ended up there. So
amazing.
Initially it was like, well, that's given me a richness that I didn't expect from the 57. And it's a real can of worms. I mean, you know, people have seen the video, and I didn't steal this. Andy showed me, but Andy Sneap, first time I worked with him was about 1998. And I watched in horror as we were doing this on 2-inch tape, as they got the, jokingly, but I think we did, got the police line do not cross tape out. Because we spent about 3 hours determining the miking technique for this cab, because that was going to be the sound of the album. And we were with an incredibly fussy guy who's a good friend of mine, a guy called Mark Minert. He was in this band called Kill to This. And I've seen him since, and we've laughed about it. He goes, yes, I was on the very deep side of anally retentive back then. He goes, I think I've got better. But he was brilliant. But it literally was. We spent hours trying different things, and the technique that Andy showed me then, which was to try every single cone, same position on each cone, determine which of the cones on a 4x12 is either the best sounding or the least harmful. What is it about each of those that is doing something? Because even like a straight out the factory, cabinets have different sounds. So why not go, I'm going to sweep round, I'm going to deal with what's actually making the hairs go up on the back of my arms. Deal with that as a starting point, then add to it, and then make those decisions based on how it fits into the music. So yeah, it gets quite deep. I'm no Al Schmidt. But I use EQ. I EQ the piss out of stuff. But the starting points are always, how can we do the least amount of harm to start with,
Yeah.
and sort of build from that.
That's amazing. Thanks so much for that, Mike. That's amazing insight. Tell us your thoughts on as well. So obviously we touched on like STL, Tone Hub, and a couple of other simulators. But what's your thoughts on real amps versus the simulators? Do you think the simulators are almost there now with the new technology, or?
I own guitars. I'm not a brilliant guitarist, so I don't feel the difference the way a guitarist would feel it. But I've worked with enough people who you can't fool them, and it's very, very mixed. It's sometimes it can be a visual thing. It's like when I said about the singer looking down and seeing an 87 and loving it. A guitarist might hate the idea of the little German pith helmet Kemper sat there with a display beaming at him and going, that's never going to get my sound. Another guitarist may embrace it. We've come a long way. I think the first time I saw a Fractal version 1 was 2008, and they were pretty hairy. They were a hell of a lot better than the pods. But when you look at where we've got to now, there's an immensely good amount of units that are brilliant, but there's still no getting away from the fact that a guitarist might just want his head in the room and able to tweak it. So I'm a big fan of the reactive load, so like the Oxbox or the 2-note stuff, and I'm using 2-notes because you can actually do your own impulse responses. And there's a new phrase I think has become recabbing, because you sort of record. I'm now recording three tracks or three signals. I'm recording a DI, the amp signal, and the cab signal, so that if there is anything wrong with the cab I choose, I can recab it in software afterwards. And I may go for like an STL Ignite Libra where I can mix a bunch of IRs together. But my main point is whatever makes the player happy is what we're going to use. I don't force anything on them. I've got Kemper, I've got real cabs, I've got the 2-note stuff. I encourage them to be part of the process, and then they can decide. And then it's their fault.
Right, fair enough.
No, it's a completely collaborative process. I mean, the whole idea of doing is of checking out every single speaker on a 4x12 is you involve the guitarist in that process, listening through your studio monitors while you're doing it. So they become used to what's coming through these things. You're never ever going to get that sound of that 4x12 with the trouser flapping. That is never going to come through those speakers the way that you perceive it when you're in front of it. So the best way to get to that point is to get the guitarist working with you to make the decisions on every step of the way. And then they know that you're fully invested in what they're trying to achieve, and it becomes the beginning of this lovely relationship. And it's all about maintaining those relationships and getting the psychology within all the complicated machinations of a band and making a record. I mean, that's just one part of it, but you've got to invest in them, and then they trust you.
That's incredible. Thanks so much for that, Mike. Tell us as well, so we talked about guitar amp simulations. What about drum replacement? What about like recording drums live or, with mics versus replacing the snare or replacing the bass drum? What's your feelings and thoughts on that?
Again, it's completely whatever works. One of the things I used to say, if a band wanted to do their own demos, it's like getting back to that Guerrilla thing. If all they can afford is an 8-channel interface, then get a kick and a snare, get a DI off the guitar, get a DI off the bass. So I'm up to 4 channels now. Get a guide vocal, whatever's left, record them, and then, if necessary, we'll throw some samples in. Might have to replace some guitars or whatever. If we're trying to get something that they literally cannot afford to go into a studio, do that. If you've got the situation where you've been stupid enough to try something new technology-wise and you fucked up your kick drum sound, then you can throw a sample in, because that didn't happen to me a few weeks ago when I was trying something at all.
Right.
No, I think accidents will happen. Mics go down. I had a this is why I cover things with a few different mics. I did have a had a mic which died halfway through a 6-minute song,
Right.
and so I had to apply some cleverness. I've got no issue. I use samples where necessary. They're usually to beef up something that is lacking in what was provided to me as a sound source. If I'm producing and let's say the band are on a tight budget and the gear just isn't sounding great, it's not speaking. We try everything. It's not going through the microphones. I'm not going to spend 2 days changing it. There's no point. So it's like, okay, we'll get the essence of what's happening. We'll pick up enough life through the overheads. We'll use the basic kicks and snares to get the vibe. We'll do our best with them, but we'll just have to kind of enhance with what we can. If it's something that I've had control of and it's I'm working with really, really top-notch people, then it's unlikely we're going to need anything to actually bolster up the sound. It's mainly the Andy Wallace thing of using samples to fire into reverbs.
Yeah.
Just so cool that you can set off reverbs without getting all that crap. But to be honest, expanders and gates have got so good over the last few years. And the way that you can use trigger points to open gates, you know, I did the final Black Sabbath show a few years ago. I mixed that, and I took a day to lay in trigger points on a 2-hour show of every single drum hit in the show, not to put samples in, to open gates, because there was more of Ozzy in the drum mics than there was the drums at times, because they're just using big stage monitors, and you know, it was a bit of a mess. So to get any punch out of those drums, I had to work to open gates where necessary, and it was a much more natural musical sounding thing. It wasn't a technical death metal band that you could just throw samples in. This was Black Sabbath, you know. So so really it's based on what's required, what do you think it needs, and I think that's the thing that experience brings. Also communication, because if you can communicate with the artist, you know what they're looking for, so you go on this journey with them to provide what they need. I had a film director there as well, Dick Carruthers, his name is, absolutely brilliant, and he was like, this has got to sound like the final Black Sabbath show. Fuck that one up, you know. So but what was great with that was quite inspirational, because there were visuals there to work from as well eventually. I didn't realize it was going to be the film. I thought it was just an album we were doing, but it was actually then 4 days in, someone said, oh, should we switch the screen on? I went, what? Oh, that's good, isn't it? You know. So yeah, samples, absolutely. Use whatever you can. I did get told once if I was going to put Mellotron on something, I had to use a real Mellotron. That didn't last very long. You know, stop it. You know,
that's it.
That is obsessing over stupidity for me.
Yeah, well, I suppose we live in a golden age of technology now, though, don't we, as well? And things are progressing, and it's incredible. So, on that topic, for example, Outboard Gear, and as you said, though, you're in the box when you're predominantly mixing. So, with Outboard Gear versus plugins, do you think plugins are close enough to a lot of the Outboard Gear, or maybe the plugins are maybe developed into something completely different, like the Pro Q3 or something like that? You know, it's really interesting time.
the Fab filter, that was really funny. Fab filter, I looked at it and went, I'm not fucking using a plugin that looks like you're stuck in the middle of a rave. It was like, Jesus Christ. It's actually one of the most intuitive EQs ever. It's brilliant.
Yeah,
I love the Fab filter EQ. I mix on, as I say, I mix on Yukon, so it's very important to me that things map to the control surface. I need to be able to reach over and know that I'm dealing with low mid cut and changing the frequency and the bandwidth. I had a C24 before. It was very easy to map plugin, remap the plugin controls to the different encoders. That's been announced as coming in the next version of software. So I use specific go-tos like Pro Q3, and I know that the 7-band EQ maps like it did on the old Icons, so I know that I've got low and high shelving and low mids, highs and high mids on one screen, so there's 8 knobs on the dock, and then I've got the mid-range and the filters on the second screen, and I can reach for those. I don't need to look at a screen to see this stuff, so it's very important that stuff maps for me. And that's my point about plugins is, again, it's the same thing as sounding like a broken record, but it doesn't need to sound anything like what it's emulating for me. I want an EQ to do what an EQ should do. I was lucky enough. I know that certain things have a character. I learnt on SSL E-Series, Neve VR, Neotech, Sony MCI, and then when I got back to England, I was on DDA, AMEC Angela. Those 6 desks sound completely different. It's the mic pre's and the EQ sound very different, but when you've got a desk full of the same EQ, you make it work. You react to what's coming out of the speakers. So I'm all for what reaction do I get to twisting a knob. I don't chase the emulations of hardware because I think it's I think it's a bit of a pointless cause. I need something to work. I've said that about the microphones and the outboard gear. I want something to be easy enough to use and do its job. So if I want to tweak something out of a annoying frequency, I'll use the tool that is easiest. Pro Q3 is great. I love my Massenburg Design Works. That actually maps better for the solo isolate, the band isolate function. So I'm using things that I go, there's a frequency in there I don't like. Bang. Right. I've got that. Great. That's gone. I can now carry on. All compressors compress. They just do. And what you get from different compressors is different amounts of harmonic distortion, transformer stuff, transfer characteristics. All of these things just do something that reacts completely differently to everything you throw at them. And I don't see the need to spend millions of processor cycles emulating something that someone has decided is a golden unit. And there are some incredible EQs out there just going on about EQs. I mean, the Sonox R3 is a brilliant EQ. That wasn't even ever an analog EQ. It was a digital console, an incredible digital console. And I'm testing some stuff at the moment that is based on another console from the 90s, and it's awesome. And with your question of now they've sort of become enhanced, this thing's got things on it that the original console didn't have. That's what's great about plugins. For some reason, everybody needs a mix control on compressors. I've got some bizarre notions about that. When it comes down to compressors, I think the Distressor is the best compressor that has come out in decades. I think it's the most versatile. It's absolutely brilliant at what it does. It's like about 10 different compressor characteristics in one unit. It's my go-to compressor for vocals above anything. Yeah. I use it in conjunction with a Focusrite, tickling a Focusrite compressor in my Focusrite channel strip. But the Distressor is awesome. They enhanced it when they built the Arouser. When Dave Durr created that, he went, oh, fuck it, I can do a little bit more in software. I can do stuff with the sidechain. He's just brought out version 3. It's like, wow, there's a couple more different characteristic things now. It's brilliant. And my thing is, I've done stuff for various plugin manufacturers where they say, oh, could you do some presets? And I remember I think I did some for Waves on the Renaissance, and I went, I've never used a Renaissance compressor. Let's see what this sounds like.
Brilliant.
And I got it sounding like an 1176 and feeling like an 1176, like one of their 1176s, which is a certain color.
Yeah.
Okay, now it wasn't as quick as Twist and Go on a CLA, but it was still capable of it. So I think what plugins are allowing us to do is it's like we've already gone past the point of emulating the analog gear. Let's see what actually becomes useful. What does a good job? I'm a massive fan. I think it was my find of the week a few months ago on Production Expert, the Dan Corniff amplified instrument processor. That does the job of about 3 different things. It's got the insufferable mid-range filter, which I realized was IMF, so he's obviously a Mission Impossible fan. That thing takes out that horrible whistle.
Yeah.
It does it really nicely. It's got a compressor, it's got EQ, it's got tape console tape, solid state, and tube saturation circuits. It's one plug-in, and you can just go, fucking hell, this just does everything I need. Yeah. That's great. Can I mix without it? Yes, of course I can. Yeah. Well, that's for everyone else to decide. most people say I can't mix, but especially Judas Priest fans. But it's like,
wow, disagree with that.
Well, I mean, it doesn't matter. It's like, but that's it's that speed of getting to stuff and becoming familiar, learning how to use the gear that you've got. This stuff is brilliant. It took me a couple of weeks to transfer over from Avid's old system, the C24, to Yukon. Yeah. It's still developing. I'm actually testing it as well, some of the new stuff. You have to invest in yourself. You've got to spend time learning your tools. And part of that is being realistic and actually listening. It's like developing those skills that, and being humble about it as well, and going, yeah. And I didn't make this one. This was George Massenburg years ago. He said you've got to reference other people's work, and once you've set that as a reference, you've got to try and come up to it and attain what they've done, and don't go suddenly going, oh, that's shit, because you held that on high once. So don't delude yourself that you're better because you're finding it difficult.
I like that.
There's no excuses for you not being as good as that. You may not have the same musicians, and that is a big thing. That's a tough one starting out, is getting access to good musicians, because that's the only reason stuff sounds good.
Oh yeah, completely. If you didn't have talented musicians, it'd just be shit music, wouldn't it?
Yeah, totally.
At the end of the day, yeah.
It's very important to aspire to work with good people. It really is. So just trying to learn as much as possible and make loads of mistakes, and just learn the tools that you've got. Again, I did something recently. I did a mix of a track with all stock plugins, and then did a mix with my preferred plugins, and it was a blind listening test, and the premium mix won out 60-40.
Right.
But I know damn well that 30% of those would be guesses.
Yeah.
So, and what was lovely about it was that all the comments were really positive. It wasn't, oh, that's harsh or that's muddy. It was like, that's really clear, that's smooth. So both mixes worked. They were just slightly different, and one was done with what comes with Pro Tools.
That's incredible.
So, yeah,
that's so good. I mean,
it's like going from one console to another. You know,
yeah.
Am I mixing on a Neve? Yeah, okay, great. Am I mixing on an SSL? Great, because the automation's better. I'm going to need to put a Massenburg EQ on the stereo bus, so I can just give it a bit of top and bottom to kind of get somewhere near what the Neve does, because the Neve doesn't do mid-range the same as the SSL, and the SSL doesn't do the mid-range, doesn't do the top end the same.
Yeah.
I mean, the newer SSLs are totally different characters, but you know, E's and G's, they were hard-sounding consoles. So,
but legendary consoles as well, though, to be fair. You know, everyone loves those emulations that have come out, you know, that I think UAD have done, and
God.
Yeah,
well, it's hilarious, isn't it? Because Waves came out with those, 20 odd years ago, and now
they did.
The Waves ones are shit. And it's like, yeah, but you all loved them 20 years ago. Just because UAD have got a different transformer mod circuit. It's like, fuck it, just get on and use it. Use what you like.
Completely. Absolutely.
I like the Brainworks ones, but I'll tell you why I like the Brainworks ones. Two things. One, they're AAX DSP, so I can use them on an HDX system. And two, they've got the tolerance matching technology in them. So I use a bunch of them on buses, and I just randomize them, so it gives me a little bit of that non-linearity.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're great. They don't particularly map well, but we'll be changing that. No, they're great. And Brainworks are coming out with some great stuff, always coming out with good stuff. But I like developers that develop for DSP, because it's quite an important thing in our world. I'm going to open a can of worms about Pro Tools, because it's my platform of choice, and it's fucking good. And I don't give a rat's ass about someone's opinion about how Pro Tools is 20 years behind the curve, and oh shit, they've just come out with this, and oh wankers, I can use Studio One and it's like 100 times better. It's like, good, use what you like. But if you knew what Avid are actually doing in terms of supporting all these industries, doing way more. I mean, if I get into watching a video with two Avid guys talking about the new PEC direct switching feature on an S6, so that you can punch in destructive mode whilst doing a film mix, that nobody in music would even know what that is, and yet that's a massive part of what Avid are supporting. So they've got limited resources, they're working hard. This new hybrid engine is insane. It's really good. Brilliant. And that's changing it. It's like literally a paradigm shift in the way that HDX DSP systems will work for us great supporters who have been a bit hampered being HDX for the last few years. Avid have found a way of making it work. And it's like, as a company, they may be the terrible big, the empire, but the tools they make and what they give us is brilliant. There's only two DAWs that I can use that do the type of automation that I want, and that's Nuendo and Pro Tools Ultimate. Right. They've both got a preview and a capture function, and nothing else does it. I looked at Studio One. I went to a demo of their console, the Studio Live 64, thinking that'll be brilliant. It's a digital mixer. Look at all that DSP, digital mixer control surface. What's the automation like? Oh shit! Are there any plans to improve it? No.
I suppose it's like, at the end of the day, I suppose I'm guessing it's obviously, as you said, like Nuendo, so Steinberg Nuendo and Avid, innovating these incredible things as well. But for I think sometimes, like, as I think Nuendo's incredible. I love it. I think it's absolutely brilliant. And maybe we'll come on to Dolby Atmos in a minute. But it's the fact that I think for a lot of kids, 18-year-old kids, I know that you're an educator yourself as well, that haven't got that money to be able to spend, you know, on pro DAWs that you use.
No.
You know, so maybe it's like for those guys and girls, it's about being on Reaper, or it's about being on, you know, kind of Studio One, starting off, you know, and getting into that. You know,
it's absolutely fine, and I think Studio One is brilliant. I use it for certain things. I use Logic. I haven't used Reaper. A friend of mine's a sound designer, and he went across to it. He's like a top sound designer over in Hollywood. Not Hollywood, up in Marin County. Dave Farmer. He's just brilliant. Lord of the Rings was the start of the greatness for him.
Brilliant.
He's awesome, and he went across to Reaper because it does multiple file formats in the timeline. So it's like, I can bring in an MP3 at this, I can bring in a 16-bit of, you know, Ogg Vorbis, I can bring in anything, and it just translates it live. I don't have to do any importing processing. But his is a different world to ours. Reaper's great. I've seen so many good people using their systems, and the good people that use their systems don't piss and moan about it on forums. The people who are looking for a bit of attention are the ones that really irritate me, because it's like they're the ones that I've just moved off Pro Tools after 10 years of, you know, shit, and now everything I ever needed to do is you know, there. It's like, great, you're doing it in what you use. Stop dissing the people that are getting on with what they're doing, because it then becomes my favorite pet hate, the sheep mentality. You know, you get people. I'm lucky because obviously I'm able to have belief in what I have belief in, and my clients like what I do. So I will stand up for myself and say, no, fuck it, I use this. I don't care about whether or not people think I'm an asshole for using that. I believe, and my clients believe, that that is the right tool for the job. I don't dismiss anything out of hand either. But if someone is preaching that they love something, and then someone takes the piss out of them, and they immediately change their mind, as has happened countless times, because they're a bit afraid of the school ground bullying that goes on. That's terrible, because it's like, you know, use what you can. As I said, I was using 002. I was using an M box when I was mixing sometimes, because it was an interface that allowed me to hear. Nobody ever asked me what I was mixing through. And I find the more I work with people, I actually can't remember the last time anybody asked me a technical question during a production, because it's just assumed that you're all doing what you do. We have more conversations about pedal boards and strings and skins and all of that stuff, and movies. It's such a non-event, the technology, when you're really knee deep in the music.
Absolutely. Well, what about tuning drums as well? I think a lot of newbies, they seem to get that wrong at the beginning. Again, it's like, I suppose you need to make mistakes, like you said, though, don't they, at the end of the day? But it's like tuning a drum kit. It's like, how vital is it to tune a drum kit? You know,
incredibly important. I know the basics. I could probably take a drum kit from sounding awful to passable. But I always hope that the drummer knows how to do the same, or better than me. I started to use the DrumBot digital tuning thing to kind of get me in the ballpark a few times. And then I realized, actually, if the shell's in good condition, you put a new skin on it and you start by just equalizing the lugs and then hit it. By the time you've got some tension in it, that's especially toms, those toms are actually going to sound pretty good. And then you just have to have a little bit of knowledge and twist and go. It's certainly not intuitive for me tuning drums yet, even after all these years, but I know when it sounds wrong, and I'll get there with the drummer. But it's incredibly important. You've got to make it sound right in the room. my little drummer boy routine. I walk around the room at the beginning of a session with the floor tom, the most resonant drum in the kit, and I find out where it sounds brilliant, and then we set the kit up around that. It's just simple stuff, because there are going to be cancellation modes in the room which are going to destroy the bottom end. So start in a good place, move the kit around. It's not a job for people who want to just sit on their asses. It really isn't. It's not about post-production either. I mean, what's interesting for me is having had to do a lot of mixing over the last 18 months. It's quite interesting hearing how other people have recorded, and some budget stuff. Some budget stuff is better than others. I've learned an awful lot about what I should set as my expectations for tracks that are being delivered to me, for example. But there's an awful lot that can be gleaned from having conversations. I'm in the mid stages at the moment. I won't say much more about it, but we're developing a mentoring workshop thing that will be very much in person, coming and working for up to a week, learning how to do all this. And before I even got to the stage with a friend of mine, who I think is probably watching, Rob Dwyer, he and I were like, right, we need to make sure that we get techs involved. We make sure that if anybody's coming along to learn how to do this, they know about the importance of drum tuning, guitar setups, warming up vocals, all of the stuff that you just take for granted. I mean, tuning pianos, that's sort of a given, but is it? We even have the string debate on most sessions. I think over 30 years, I've probably set up intonation on almost everybody's guitar that's ever come into the studio.
Right.
Because there's always one guitar that just won't intonate right.
Yeah.
Every time. And you can't tell them not to use that guitar unless it actually just will not. Tried 3 different strings, the neck's warped, it's a twist in it or something like that. You've got to get that to a guy to fix it. But it's mainly this whole thing from my point of view is the art of actual recording, properly setting up and actually giving a shit and getting the most out of what's going on in the room as kind of being distilled and being lost. And I think it's highly important to give that information back, to actually mentor people, because it's insane the amount you can learn when you're actually in the thick of it. So,
absolutely agree.
Watch this space.
Amazing. No, will do. That's brilliant. Thanks for that, Mike. That's awesome. Just maybe before we have a chat about the bands that you've worked with, tell us about the monitors behind you. What monitors do you like using at the moment?
Oh, those. They're sort of what I'm stuck with at the moment.
Oh, right.
These are no, they're. I'll tell you the monitors I do like is these. I've got Focal Gear Pros because I live in rented accommodation, and I cannot start. Well, I could start hanging things from the ceiling; it would be fine. But I mean, I mix fairly quietly. But I started working on the Focals pretty much as soon as they came out. I borrowed a pair from a dealer, and I did a week's mixing with them, and it was like, right, that's ratified exactly what I needed to do, because before where I lived, I had my own room set up. So those have been really, really important to me. I've just found out that the replacement ear cups are 200 quid. So I'm not going to have a word with Focal. No, I've got some spares. But these are some Unity Audio Pebbles and Bam Bams. They're basically they're a two-way box. They're 2 boxes each side, and they're meant to sit to form a 3-way monitor. But when I was screwing around with it and I was doing a little bit of testing, I found out that I was getting a really weird thing going on in the high mids with them on their side. So I just turned them like that and they improved dramatically. They're not my favorite monitors. They will be going at some point, but I just don't need to yet. I'm a big fan of, I like Focal monitors in the right room. I put Gospel Oak Studios near me. I use Twin 6s a lot and also Genelec 8040s.
Nice.
But those are the important ones. The old Oratones at the bottom aren't connected anymore. They're being used as a stand. I use Oratones and a pure radio for critical balancing on certain things. And the reason they're next to each other is because I don't like monoing stuff up. I'd rather hear stereo over there, because obviously when you mono, you drop the outside by whatever the panning law is. So the moment you mono up heavy guitars in a rock mix, you've lost 2.5 dB. It's just finding a bunch of different things that work for you that allow you to hear what you need to hear. And having the Focal headphones is great because I've been able to walk into other studios and stick the headphones on and immediately be at home and then learn what I need to learn. We do adapt fairly quickly to new speakers. I don't know if that's just an experience thing, because you know kind of what something's meant to sound like. I find it easier to adapt nowadays, but then that may be because I've got those always with me, that I've got that crutch of going, oh, have I got enough of this? Oh yeah, okay, yeah, that's fine.
Amazing.
Monitoring is the most important thing. It's twofold. It's the most important thing. Monitoring is far more important than preamps, converters, and all of that shit. Because if you don't know what you're listening to, how can you make a judgment on what you're recording through?
Sure.
And monitoring is massively important for the artist as well. The most important mix of any session is the headphone mix. Sorry, headphone mixes.
Yeah.
I do all of my headphone mixes myself. Even if we've got hearback systems, I generally do the artist mixes and just say, your channel 1, 2, that's you, and I'll do your mix internally. Because, not being nasty to artists, but I wouldn't trust most of the people I work with to mix the record. They wouldn't trust themselves to mix it, would they? I mean, you might get the odd Pro Tools warrior that does, but how can someone that can't really understand balance get their own mix the way they need it to? Because it's really not dissing the artist, but it's like you find that when they ask for a bit more bass and you listen to their mix, what they're actually asking for is something slightly different. And if you turn the bass up, then you're into this round robin of like, oh, now I can't hear the kick drum. And what you really should have done is possibly just tweak something or pan something out differently so they can hear it. So I like to, in most cases, there's at least, if it's reasonable, if it's a 4 or 5 piece, I'd like to think I can get them all their own headphone mixes.
Brilliant.
Because it's so important. It's all about the vibe, you know. And we're working all together in a room generally as well. It's about getting everybody to have that eye contact and still be able to hear. It's enhancing that rehearsal room environment.
That's brilliant. That's so good. Thanks for that, Mike. That's brilliant. In connection to headphones as well, just in general, I spoke to a few other engineers about this, that I suppose, I don't know what your thoughts are, but predominantly most people these days tend to listen in headphones now as well. So that's really interesting. But also as well, what are your thoughts on the headphone plugins that have come out as well? So I know a few companies have done them. Do you like them? Do you not? You know, how do you work with it?
It was quite fun. It's like the Waves Abbey Road thing. That kind of
that sort of stuff.
Okay, so I listened to the headphones and I went for the ones that fitted me. So I was able to try Focal Head, Audizy. Who are the other ones? That other one, the one that looks like the I can't remember what the make is. Anyway, I listened to a lot of them, and to me, what I was hearing and the comfort factor on these suited me.
Yeah.
And because what I was hearing was unfucked with, I listened initially through a good converter I was using in the Pro Audio dealer. I actually took my laptop up initially and played some stuff, and I was listening to a really good RME D2A. I now use cord headphone DACs if I'm not using my my rig here, which is
Nice.
it's a Focusrite HDX like red interface. So I'm always making sure I've got the right things, and I'm thankfully, thanks to Don Morley for putting me in touch with Cord, because that was this little headphone amp. This isn't anything about trying to get gear shit in, but this is fucking brilliant. This little Cord Mojo. Right?
Yeah, I've seen those. Yeah.
That fits in my Clear Pro case, so that travels, and it means, again, I've got a consistent monitoring environment. So round robin, to answer the question, when Wave said to me, can you do some stuff for the NX thing, I went, I'm just not interested, because I don't want to sound like I'm in Abbey Road Studio 3.
Right.
Why do I need to learn another environment that potentially I don't like? I don't know. I've only been to Abbey Road Studio 3 a couple of times and never to mix. So I don't actually get that at all. If it works for you and gives you a great vibe, great. But I kind of figure that headphones are meant to put you in your own space, not emulate someone else's. But that's just me. As I say, I stand by my opinions, and anybody that actually uses it and gets great results, I applaud you. I don't mean that sarcastically. I really applaud you, because I would far rather someone got excited and it drove them to do something great. So brilliant. And I'm all for things that make your listening more consistent. I think that's the most important thing. It's a hard enough job to deal with without having to deal with inconsistencies. So again, find shit that works for you.
Absolutely. That's awesome.
Yeah. I see you've got some big old cans on.
Yeah, they've got the LCDXs. I really enjoy using those. So yeah, really enjoying using that. I've got a so you mentioned RME, but I use a RME.
One of us is frozen, and I don't know which one.
ADI2 Pro. In a sec, we're live. It's all fine.
That's all right. Yeah. I can see me, but I didn't know if you'd frozen or I had.
No, you're good. Sorry about it.
You've got the ADI.
So it's ADI2 Pro FS, the RME.
Cool,
yeah, it's a great converter. So I tried it with some speakers. I was using them in my home studio, but also in a couple of commercial spaces with speakers have I used, like some Yamahas and some like NS10s. I know that, whatever your thoughts are on NS10s, I know that they're the studio staples. They are, absolutely. But it sounds great. I'm really, really, really happy with it, to be fair. It's absolutely brilliant. So thanks for that, though, Mike. But tell us, let's maybe have a chat about some of the artists that you've worked with as well, if that's cool with you. So let's just start there. Let's go with it. Sabbath. Tell us about Sabbath and 13. Tell us about the album that you worked on. It's a great album.
So 13 came after we'd worked with Ronnie James Dio on what was to be his last album. So Sabbath Mark II with Ronnie and Vinny Appice playing drums. That turned into Heaven and Hell, the band, because Sabbath was still Ozzy and the boys. So they said, well, we'll call ourselves Heaven and Hell. And that turned into a fantastic project, brilliant year of my life, and great tour afterwards, and some real fun stuff. And prior to that, we'd done a best of Black Sabbath with Dio. So when Ronnie died, which is now 11 years ago, Tony and I were working together, and there was a few things. We ended up working on a project with Ian Gillan for the Armenian people. It was to carry on something that had happened in the 80s when they had a horrendous earthquake. So we did a project with Ian Gillan and a few friends, and it was like not sure what's likely to happen next. And then Tony had a phone call off Sharon saying Ozzy would like to talk, and so that set in motion a couple of years of Black Sabbath. And it was really as simple as Tony and I, ever since about 2006, shortly after the Fused album, his previous solo album, we'd got together regularly to put down riffs and build on them. So he would have a catalogue of stuff to play to people when album projects came up or one-off collaborations and things. So we were going through this process, and out of the first things came the Dio Years songs, which was 3 songs on that Best of Black Sabbath album, and then the Gillan project, a couple of other things. So December 2010. Sharon and Ozzy came up to Tony's, and we spent about an hour and a half playing Ozzy lots and lots of demos, and he was blown away. He was like, this stuff is incredible. So he went away. I sent him away with, I think, three ideas for him to work on, and then early in 2011 Tony went back out to LA to meet up with the other guys and Rick, and they listened through the stuff, and Rick's opinion was that it was too orchestral and too big sounding for what he had in mind for a new Sabbath album,
right? Which
is when he came out with those immortal lines of "just imagine you're following your first album," which completely confused everybody, but in essence, it was a really good call, because what they needed to do was not forget the 40 years that had gone on in between, but get back to what the essence of Black Sabbath was. And it's something that you find a lot when you're working with I don't want to call them legacy bands, heroes and legends, let's call them that. Is that they picked up that amazing fan base by doing what they did off the cuff, and I don't know if they all do it, but there is a certain amount of chasing trends, moving with what's popular, evolving. And I'm not by no means saying Sabbath were doing this, but they were a very different band by the time we finished The Devil You Know, which was the one with Dio. It was much more classic Dio Sabbath, but it was still newer. So to carry on with what was going on there as a writing technique would have been wrong for Sabbath. But the songs that went into that album were probably 80, 90, maybe more % of the songs that were originally played. They just got put through the Black Sabbath machine, which was to get everybody in a room and work together. And the point is, it doesn't matter how much programming, because I was doing drum programming, playing bass on all the demos, doing the keyboards, all of that kind of stuff. Wow. And before everything was fully worked out, we spent a short while, just Tony and me working with Ozzy, just sort of just getting his ideas on the new material. And because I was I'd been the hub of all the computer stuff and the keeper of the crypt, we went into his and we started playing them together. So for a very short while, I was playing bass with Ozzy's drummer. Oh God, I'll think of his name in a minute. That's terrible. And Tommy Prophetus. So Tommy and I were the rhythm section, and Ozzy and Tony were doing their thing. And that was kind of surreal, just being there playing in Sabbath. But we kind of worked that out. So the song process it needed to be put through that Black Sabbath filter, and that was a very Rick thing to do. From the outside, just go, why not do this? He's brilliant. He's done it with so many people, and these are the albums like the Johnny Cash thing. Go back to your roots.
Oh man, yeah, so good.
And it doesn't work for everybody, and sometimes it's a tough one to be in the middle of when you think, where's he going with this? But he was actually fascinating to work with, and the album turned out to be just incredible. To watch the guys relearn their relationships and bond and have fun and laugh, and I mean, it was as a non-Sabbath fan, because I didn't grow up as a Sabbath fan. I grew to love them through the projects I've done. I mean, I think I've worked, bar one, I think I've worked with every Sabbath singer. I've been with Tony 26 years. So I've been exposed to the catalogue not as a fan, and I think that's helped as well, because I don't go in search of this like holy deity thing. It's just like we're doing what we do. We love it. We get on incredibly well. And I'm honest with him, and he's honest with me, and so we have a great relationship too. So when I got into the beginning of that particular project, it was very much about understanding how this was going to work with Rick. And so for probably another, well, we started in the beginning of 2011. Tony got his cancer diagnosis at the end of 2011. So that put back things a little bit, but he carried on working through. And it took us until September 2012 before we started recording.
Right.
So on and off, we did an awful lot of backwards and forwards, and it was a massive effort to really leave no stone unturned and work on it. And again, it's I was saying to you about the Priest stuff before we came on. It's not so much polarizing any of these albums. I think it divides into thirds. You've got the people that absolutely hate it, the people that absolutely love it, and the people that are just like, it's not as good as Volume 4, but it's Sabbath. So what's important is that all that matters is that the band like it.
Yeah.
For those who weren't privy to our conversation, I was just reading a thread about, because someone decided it was time to lambast Redeemer of Souls, which is the Judas Priest album I did after 13. And it's really funny. The thread is this animosity in there, because it's like, this is the biggest piece of shit ever, and then they're like, I really love this. Nostradamus is the biggest piece of shit, and you've just got all these opinions flying around, and it's like, but that's what makes the world go round. Enough people liked what we did, and I'll tell you what, the band did. So so in terms of 13, it does polarize people. Rick took a lot of shit for it, and I think some of it's really unfounded. It's like, it gets quite nasty on the internet. I don't know if you've noticed.
Well, yeah, it can do. Yeah.
But but yeah, it was a fucking brilliant project to be involved in. I mean, they're lunatics. They're hilarious, and it turned into. When did it come out? So 2013. They finished their tour 4 years later.
Yeah.
And they did the world proud.
Yeah.
And so I mean, specifically 13 was a massive thing for me. It got me across to LA over a period of 2 years, a lot of times immersed in doing that. And it was a real fun project to be involved in. It was so hotly anticipated. We couldn't talk about it for a year beforehand.
Wow.
They didn't announce it until the 11th of the 11th of 11. It was the big date when they announced. They did a thing at the Whiskey, I think it was the Whiskey, where they announced they were all together doing an album. So we'd been working on that for 11 months. without anybody knowing. That's a tough one, you know. That makes it quite hard to tell people what you're up to.
But it's exciting
It
as
was
well,
brilliant.
though, doing that. Yeah.
I mean, I'm like I've been involved in some projects that people do know about and they're like, fuck, Dio's back with Iommi. I mean, that's one where people were like, holy shit, this is huge, you know.
Yeah.
And that was fun. Those I have to say, I think as experiences go, those two are the cream of the crop for me so far, as Bart Simpson or as Homer Simpson would say to Bart. But you know, a year with Ronnie and the guys just beating each other with like, I'm going to beat you. This is we can make this better, and that album holds a massively dear place in my heart. 13, Devil You Know, 13 is up there with it.
Incredible.
Different experience though, very different.
Amazing. With Rick Rubin as well, there was he quite hands-off with his approach? He's famous for, if I'm right in saying, as a producer, for having a hands-off approach and not really been there that much even.
Well, he does what Rick does is he sees the big picture. He comes down and he makes sure that the work is being done in providing the songs, because it's all about the songs.
Yeah.
He's very good at making decisions. He's mediating a lot of the time. He mediates what needs mediating. Yeah. If he doesn't think he can offer something, he won't offer it. I remember he felt very strongly about a few things. We had a couple of really lovely one-on-one conversations where he didn't tower over me saying something. He was sat in a chair and he just went, I just want this to be right for the guys. I think this is the right choice. I would never force them, but I think this is the right choice. And I was like, yeah, do you know what? On this one, I agree. I really, really do. And for him to be, this was in the earlier stages as well. This was during songwriting. So for him to be kind of, initially he wouldn't talk to anybody but the person he wanted to talk to. Now I don't know if that's nerves, because he was dealing with Black Sabbath, because that was huge for him.
Sure.
He would sometimes ignore anybody in the room but the four members of the band. But on particular occasions, we would sit down and we would chat. And he's not a chatty person, but that was really nice. And I got a really good feeling about what he was doing. And so when it actually came to recording, we sort of diverted into a team, or we ended up as a team. I sat there a lot. Greg Fiddleman was the lead on that one. I was the liaison between the English and the Americans.
Right.
Because there's a shorthand with Sabbath. I'd worked with Geezer for a few years. This is the first one I'd done with Oz. But Tony, I'd known at that point for 16 years. So we have a shorthand. And getting that communication happening was massively important. And Rick would sometimes turn around to me and just be like, am I reading this right? I'm not entirely sure whether I'm pushing this right. And I'd be like, oh no, Tony's just fucking around. He's doing something that he always does. Don't take that the wrong way. Or, no, what they meant when Geese told Ozzy to piss off was, he was actually agreeing with him. Just some of this lost in translation stuff. Poor old Brad was the one that didn't have a clue what was going on, because he was stuck in the room with the English people trying to do a job. And he was awesome, Brad. Absolutely. Diamond. Just what a choice. And this was another thing, I've told this many, many times, but we sat down one day, Rick and Tony and me, just outside on one of the tables, and Tony said to Rick, how did you find Brad? And he said, I've done a couple of albums with him. And I thought, fucking couple of albums? Only, some of the biggest albums ever. And so he goes, you know, he goes, I remember the day that that I heard that Chris Cornell was looking for a new band. He said, I remember that Zach had decided he didn't want to work with Rage, so I just thought, oh, band meet singer.
Amazing. Love
and
that.
I'm like, fucking hell, he put Audio Slate together just by going, oh, that could work. And he was the same with Aerosmith and Run DMC. He's like, oh yeah, that's kind of hip hoppy. That would probably. Well, why don't you see? What's the worst that can happen? Just those two things that he's done. Just those two is a legacy in itself. So I guess he can cut himself enough slack to not really care what anybody thinks, because you don't get 100% hit rate with anything, but he does have courage in his own convictions. This sheep thing that I detest, he just definitely doesn't have that, and that's why some people don't like him.
It's fair enough, and everyone's can have their own opinion. At the end of the day, everyone's different, and everyone's got different taste and thoughts, and how many billion human beings there are on this planet. Everyone's entitled to say what they want. It is what it is.
Exactly. I just saw a question there. How did I end up working on 13? Really, it wasn't word of mouth. It was because I've worked with Tony for so long. That as I said, the keeper of the crypt, I had I was the person that was the trusted engineer to pull all the stuff together, because when you've got prolific people outputting ideas all the time, you need to be structured in your capturing. You need to know how to find anything. You're supplying listening copies to everybody. You're making notes. My editing skills, although not quite as good as Randy Staub when they were making the Black Album on tape, and I did used to do a lot of tape editing, my Pro Tools editing skills are just, well, they were honed on that project, because you were taking band all playing together going, oh, could we try that? And it's like, it's shuffle edit this and that. There's no clicks, there's nothing. It's all about going, okay, I'm keeping an eye on that, making notes, and then being organized. I ran a database of stuff, and I use this piece of software called Disc Catalog Maker, which allows me to have every single idea, and everything that was anything to do with that project was searchable. There's a guy called Rick Simpson. He works with Coldplay. He's the only other person I know in the industry that uses Disc Catalog Maker. It's for the same reason. It was being able to find a copy. If Tony goes back through his CDs and finds a song he likes, generally on the CD there'll be a designation, and I will have what that CD contained as a label. So it could be like HH0013, which would be Heaven and Hell writing sessions, idea number 13, and I have a Pro Tools session that corresponds to all that. So recently we've actually been working on something that was from 2008 as an idea that never got used. So it's very important to be organized. So that's the engineer's head goes on there, because I'm providing a service to them to pull it together. Because you can't call it Age of Reason, because it's got no lyrics. That wasn't what it was called, by the way. Age of Reason was actually called Epic.
Right.
Because that was the 9-minute job. I don't think it ended up as 9 minutes. But you have to find a way of just helping everybody through that process, being organized.
Absolutely. No, thanks so much for that, Mike. That's amazing. Tell us a band that scared me as a kid. Well, I'm in my late 30s. Let's talk about Cradle of Filth, the crazy things that they got up to, and the stories.
They scared me. The funny thing about Cradle of Filth was it's the only gig I ever turned down, and it was turning that down that led to 26 years with Tony. I was working at Depp International, which was UB40's studio. I was the head engineer there. And for some reason, I think it was because of Nick Barker, the drummer, they liked working in Birmingham. He's really good friends with the guys from Napalm Death.
Right.
It's particularly Shane. So I think it was suggested, oh, Birmingham's a good city. There's a metal bar at the time called Costermongers. All right, we'll go to Birmingham. We'll work on the album, and so Cradle of Filth came via Music for Nations, the label, and the remit from the guy, I can't remember his name, but anyway, he rings and he goes, "You're the main engineer there." Oh, yeah. He goes, "Are you interested in producing the album?" And I went, "I've not really heard of them. What is it?" He said, "I'll send you a demo on DAT." And this is that mythical thing. It's quite funny, but I was sat at home. I decided to take some wiring home, some looms to work on. And I thought, I'll stick the DAT machine on. And to anybody that doesn't know what DAT is, it's digital audio tape. It was our little high-res cassettes that we used to record shit on. MP3 or WAV to anybody now. And so I stick the DAT machine on, and this fucking thing comes on right at the moment that a biblical thunderstorm is going on outside. And I went, fuck this. And I rang the guy, I went, no. I said, I've got absolutely nothing in common with this. What is it? He goes, oh, it's black metal. I went, no. He goes, all right, fair enough. I said, by all means, bring him to the studio, but I wouldn't know the first thing about what to do with it. I'm listening to fucking reggae going on and crap American AOR that I just discovered a few years ago. It was the early 90s. It was 90. I think it was 95. It was 95. Yeah. So anyway, I get a call from the studio manager. He goes, they appreciated your honesty. He said, they're going to get Kit Walvin in, who is a great, great producer. And he did a lot of the Thin Lizzy and he did some David Bowie stuff. And he used to work a lot with Tony Visconti. They built Good Earth Studios, which is now Dean Street.
Yeah.
And Kit had actually done the first Magnum album on a Storyteller's Night at Depp years before. So he was like, oh, this will be fun. And I immediately start looking up Kit Walvin. There was no internet or area. I'm like, what's Kit done? And then I'm like, fucking hell, he's done a Dave Gilmour record. Great. I'm going to make friends with him. I want stories about Gilmour.
Yeah.
And he and I hit it off straight away. And we had a friend, an assistant who was he was freelance at the time, Dan Spriggan. He got the gig of doing the Cradle of Filth record. And I said, well, look, I'm around if necessary. And Kit started working on the Filth stuff. And the turning point was, I think about a week in, Dan comes up to me and says, oh, we might have a problem here. I said, what? He goes, keyboard player can't play. Well, he can't play in time. I went, oh, there's a problem, isn't it? Because by this point, I discovered it's quite orchestral. And so I'm like, oh, that's a bit of an issue, isn't it? And he said, I've told Kit that you play. I went, what the fuck do you do that for, you twat? So anyway, Kit comes up and he says, look, he goes, I've spoken to Nick, the studio manager, and he says we're okay to use both studios. He says, I start doing some ADAT transfers. Would you work on the keyboards downstairs? I'm like, yeah, of course. Give me something to do. And so I ended up doing a lot of the orchestrations and keyboard playings on that album. And what was lovely about that was at that point we were looking for another assistant in Depp, and I was advised to take on this guy called Don Morley, who was working at a local studio, and he's I would say he's my proudest achievement apart from my kids. He's got a Grammy for Amy Whitehouse. He's a stunning guy and a brilliant engineer and producer. And he came in, and unfortunately his first gig was sitting watching me play keyboards for a summer. on Cradle of Filth. But he was good as gold. He made drinks. He made stupid, sarcastic comments about my playing, which were completely founded, and loved it. And he actually he says they were really great great times, because he then went on. There was a third thing that he worked on. I can't remember what it was, but the second thing he went into, which ties in with the Tony thing, the second thing he went into was a band called Kalik, who were being produced by the team behind Black Grape.
Oh, right, cool.
He was like, fucking amazing. These are like, I've got this incredible thing to go into. This is really big stuff. So he'd done some Cradle of Filth, the Black Grape stuff. And then during Cradle of Filth, I'll just get back to them in a minute, was when Kit Walven went and saw Tony. He says, I'm going to go and see Tony. It turns out he's working with Glenn Hughes and Don Airey on some stuff. I'll see if I can get him to come into the studio. So during that, I moved on to mixing duties with Kit. Tony came in, and that was the start of his and my relationship.
Brilliant.
So serendipitously, I turned down Cradle of Filth to then get Tony, and to then get a couple of Cradle of Filth projects. Because by then I understood Cradle of Filth, because I got involved in the music with them. So they weren't scary at all. They were fucking hilarious. They were really good fun. Danny's massively focused on what Cradle of Filth is. He's that perfect frontman for a band. I think anybody that is a great artist is going to piss a hell of a lot of people off along the way, and they're going to be angry and snipey at that person. I think I've said it before on podcasts. I think Dave Grohl comes across as a tyrant in the Sound City, the Back and Forth of Foo Fighters documentary,
really,
where it's like, wow, he's just sacked these people. It's like the band wasn't working the way he wanted it to. He gave these people a chance. Therefore,
fair point. Yeah.
He's the front man. Tony was always accused of like this revolving door of people in Sabbath. It's his band. He just wanted to make. He's got this thing inside that has to come out. Danny's the same. Danny's that front man. There is no Cradle of Filth without Danny. At the time, the 2 albums that I did with them, they had a classic lineup. They had Nick Barker on drums was just absolutely astonishingly good. He's gone on to like Dimmu Borgir and Brahira. I think Brahira he's with now.
Right, cool. I
think he's still with them. He's a powerhouse of a drummer. He's brilliant. They had Robin on bass and Jean on guitar, but the other guy that really butted heads with Danny was Stuart Anstis, and he was brilliant as well. A really, really great guitar player and writer. So it's like they had this little area of time where they came together as this second coming of Cradle of Filth, and they fucking killed it. They were brilliant. So that was exciting stuff to work on, because it was like, wow, this is something that there's a movement happening here. I get this. This has opened my eyes, and they did some really good stuff. I think that was the first deal they did with Sony, or they got the deal with Sony shortly afterwards. It was like it was huge. I did a couple more things with them, and it was the first time I'd sort of succumbed a little bit to the, we're bringing in another producer, but you can co-produce. And it was a bit of a record company. We don't trust you because you haven't got enough of a track record thing. But then that producer didn't gel with the band at all. He thought that playing Motley Crue's Dr. Feelgood was a good introduction to showing the black metal band what the drum sound was going to be like. Oh, it was fucking hilarious. They didn't warm to him, let's put it that way. And I was Kofi Annan. I was doing the going up and going out for drinks with him, going, it's all right. They do love you, really.
Yeah.
But we got through it. It was good. It did suffer. It was mixed to death by committee. They did a remix of it last year. It was a shame. I'd love to have had a go at remixing it, but then whatever. It's what it is. but that was great. We had Ingrid Pitt, the Hammer House of Horror actress, came in and voiced Countess Bathory, which is Dracula's missus. So she'd been in the Christopher Lee films, and she came in and did a spoken word bit on that, and it was fucking amazing.
Brilliant.
Got to work with a Hammer House of Horror actress, and that was really cool. So yeah, it's cool. There's lots of lucky stuff I've done, and everything is they're good experiences generally.
Amazing.
Yeah. So yeah.
Thanks so much for that, Mike. That's brilliant. We're talking about horror and all things black metal. Mickey Mouse Club.
Yeah. It's awesome. It was the time I heard the phrase "demolish ninth."
Right.
and would you mind trying that in the key of "Be Quiet"? They were fucking. It was brilliant. So Mickey Mouse Club was a thing in the 50s and 60s. I was working at. I studied at Full Sail in Florida, and during that time, they'd decided they were going to rekindle or relaunch the Mickey Mouse Club. With a whole new bunch of Mouseketeers, as they called them. And so the school, we ran a 48-track studio. I'd graduated by then, and I was interning, which was like the work experience for 3 months after the graduation. So I was interning there, and there was a guy who would come in and he would program he was a keyboard player that used to work with Richard Marx, sort of an 80s, 90s American singer-songwriter.
Yeah, I remember.
This guy was his musical director. And so he came in and he basically programmed everything up. And then we'd print that to tape, create a slave reel, which is when you mix the entire first 24 track down to 2 tracks of the second one. That would get sent down to what is now Disney Studios. It was called Disney MGM Studios. I don't know what it's called now. But anyway, so they had a recording facility there, and all the show was being filmed there. So that would go, multi-track would go down there, and the girls and boys would sing on it. And then that would come back up, and we'd mix it. And that was my life for about 2 months. Was second assistant working on Mickey Mouse Club, and it was those were the days with JC Chazé, Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, and Justin Timberlake. That's where they started. It's legitimate credit that I worked with those people, even though they were in the Mickey Mouse Club.
Crazy,
absolutely crazy in there because it's a bit of a piss take as well.
It's great. It is crazy though. When I was looking through your discography, I was just like, "What?"
I know it's brilliant. And what's really funny about the Mouse Club was that so on the MGM Studios tour, it's called Disney Hollywood Studios, I think. On the MGM Studios tour, they used to have these 2 sound stages, and one had a big SSL 5000, which was a film mixing console. Next to it was the music studio, where I think it was like a Harrison or something. But that was on the studio tour. So you would get the walking through of like the tour groups. You'd do the backstage studio tour, and then you'd get off and you'd walk through the sound studios. And in the sound studios was us lot fucking recording the Mouse Club. And it was that one point where one of the singers didn't hit the note, and that's where it came from. It's like, what is that she's singing? It's a demolished ninth. We all fucking pissed ourselves. Hid behind the console, because in those days we all just ducked because we were wetting ourselves. And I looked up and there's a fucking tour group coming through.
Oh no. And
you could hear what they were talking about. And the woman was like, I'm not entirely sure what's going on downstairs in there, but it's obviously they're having fun about something. It was horrendous. But they were really, really good fun. I mean, it was like it was kind of a golden time, because we, here I am fresh out of college and traveling backwards and forwards from Winter Park down to Disney, working on that stuff. It was cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Living in Florida.
Yeah, absolutely. Amazing. Tell us as well, thanks for that, Mike. So I know obviously you said that Priest album, the people were talking on that, forum and whatever. But tell us about working with Rob. With Rob Halford, what's it like?
He's funny. He's just Rob. I mean, he's exactly how he comes across. I don't know if anybody ever saw the podcast that I'm. We're still yet to start our second series, but I do a podcast with a friend of mine, Emiko, about mental health and navigating the music, the entertainment industry. And Rob was our final guest in December.
Yeah.
It tied in with his tell-all book, Confess, which is. If you know Rob's story, he's gone through a hell of a lot of shit in his life, and he's come through as an absolute bastion of brilliance, and his conviction in what he does is incredible. He's a funny guy. He's really funny. He's lovely. He's a consummate professional, and he's got an amazing voice.
Yeah,
and he's
absolutely.
a brilliant writer. So with him, it's very much like working with Ronnie. Get your shit together. Tell them when they can sing, and help them do it. Give them what they need, and make it enjoyable for them. Ronnie was the same. All of them, every single one of them will take direction, because they know that once you're in the inner sanctum, you're there because you're there on your own merit. It may be because you haven't fucked up, or it may be because you offer something. I like to think it's because you're offering something. Yeah. But with each of them, it was like, what do you think? How can I improve that? Immediately, anything you think of, like, I've got some ideas for this. Can we try that? They're absolutely, just put me in, get it in record. Let's have a listen. No stone is left unturned. This is the thing that seems to propagate through really good people, is they're willing to try anything. One of the earliest lessons that anybody can learn is to not dismiss it out of hand until you give it a chance. So Rob's just fucking brilliant. He's a lovely, lovely person to be around, and he's a real advocate for metal and fairness in the world as well. And I'm really lucky to consider these people friends, because we all do a good job. We work very, very hard, and you just get what you need out of them to make. They're the stars. They're the ones that have to sell this in the end to the audience. I was really lucky. I mean, I did that album, Redeemer of Souls, I did with Glenn. I co-produced it with Glenn, and we weren't either of us going through particularly great times in our lives, so we were a support to each other. But when it came to doing Firepower, the follow-up, Glenn was already, he hadn't announced it to the world, but he was already a few years into the horrendous decline with Parkinson's. I've been through a major nearly life-ending event myself. So we were sort of getting through this, but they still wanted me involved in Firepower, and by bringing Andy Sneap and Tom Allen in, we had a lovely, lovely working thing. I would say Firepower is probably up there actually with 13 and The Devil You Know.
Yeah.
But it was a different experience, and it had its issues in the way of pushing it along. It was really, really important that stuff was done in a certain way, and it was arduous at times, but not fun. It was just, with certain things, there were logistic things to deal with. I'll put it that way. But it was fucking brilliant, and it's a stunning coming back to form. With Redeemer, it was very much an isolated feeling album. It was there was a lot of stuff going on where Richie could only be over for a certain time, Scott could only be over for a certain time. and Glenn and I would be stuck on our own with him having just found out he's got Parkinson's. There's a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah.
Rob had a horrendous back surgery in the middle of it as well. So
Flipping heck.
this was one of those where I'm like, am I like recording Def Leppard here? This is like the unluckiest band in the world. But that's why Firepower was so triumphant, because it was like, it started with such a fucking great feeling of, we're going to kick ass on this, and it was just brilliant, and the learning experience as well. I mean, just seeing Tom work, not a hands-on guy anymore, but fucking hands-on with ideas and production, and you couldn't want for a better person to egg a vocalist on and push him. I got to do Rob's follow-up, the Christmas album, a couple of years ago, Celestial. He said during the making of Firepower, would you produce my Christmas album? And I'm like, yeah, bloody right. And I was able to experience that rejuvenated Rob. No back issues, off the back of Firepower, doing something he was desperate to do, which was a family Christmas album. I mean, it sounds so funny, doesn't it? But it was absolutely not tongue in cheek.
Why not?
If you listen to some of the lyrics on the self-penned stuff, it's like, he really family means a lot to him. You can tell that when you listen to his books. So a very, very lovely, generous person, and a fucking amazing singer. And you can't ask for more when you work with people like that. You're just enhancing, you know.
Absolutely, that's amazing. It's as well as like these legends that you work with. You know, the fact that they've been through so much, and it's incredible that they still have that passion and that fire within them to carry on. And it's such a great and important thing, Mike, that you've touched on there as well. It's like men, especially everyone's mental health, but men's mental health hasn't been talked about, until recently. And the fact that you're doing that podcast as well, brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Well,
so commend you on
there's a hell of a lot of people working very hard to bring it to the forefront. And I didn't even know there was a thing called mental health until I went through it, and then I found out, oh, it's a thing. Oh, I fit that box. And I spoke about it at the NAMM show in California a few years ago. And I think I was the first person that had brought it up in public, about, this, the years preceding it had been the most successful of my life so far at the time. And it's like, to get to that point where you've got a record that's number one in 33 countries, the Grammy has been won for it. The Priest record's gone stratospheric, biggest until Firepower came out, which beat it by one, but it was the highest charting position for a Judas Priest record. All of these things are going on, and then to have such a monumental fall, it's like people don't get it. So to talk about it, people started to realize that actually, you know what, this is bigger. And then we went through that awful time with Chester and Chris Cornell, within weeks of each other. So good is coming out of it, and it's so important to talk about it, because there's like last year that there's still a massive mental health pandemic going on. It's gonna run for years, the effects of this.
Big time.
And it's just important to keep an eye out for your fellow people. And this is where music's really helping. I mean, it can be a tough one, because music can actually be a trigger, in which case you need to start looking at other creative things. I've got a friend, he does the rock and roll coloring books.
Really? Yeah, that's cool. I like that.
Yeah,
that's great.
I think they're actually called rock and roll coloring. I just look it up on Facebook. They're brilliant.
Will do.
You've got no idea how many people in bands. Some people have fallen foul of drugs and drink, and there's an awful lot of devils making time for idle hands stuff going on tour buses. And amazingly, some of these the most venomous metal bands, they do colouring.
Brilliant.
Why not? Because it invokes a different part of the brain. It invokes the prefrontal lobe, which distracts the lizard part of the brain, paraphrasing someone who told me in great detail. If you can suppress what's going on in the lizard cortex, it enables your creative side to just do what it does, and then that gets on with the regulating cortisol and serotonin and all these things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important to regulate that so that you don't go into panic attacks. And it's all very well someone saying, "Oh, I just put a record on." Not a good idea if music is your thing that you need to get away from. So so it's an incredible understanding, and what that does is that really informs production now, because I always thought I was a good psychologist before I went through all my shit. Now I really understand people, and that's why I get very defensive on their behalf. I don't like bullying.
No, absolutely agree with you.
That happens a lot.
Absolutely. It's, but I think as well, the internet, I think it was Bowie that said this, that the internet, I'm paraphrasing here, obviously, but Bowie said that the internet is going to be one of the best things to happen to humanity, but also one of the worst as well.
Definitely. Yeah, it's become something that's far too available. I mean, you can't put the genie back in the bottle, even though Mr. President tried to at one point. I think it's about regulating access to it. Personally, you've got to grow broad shoulders, and it's a real tough one. I mean, it's very, very difficult. You have to be so careful when you talk about anything mental health. You can't dismiss anything, but only you can prevent yourself from being affected by something, and that's really fucking difficult. So it's a massively invasive thing, and I notice I never get pissed off when I see someone going, "I'm switching Facebook off." I mean, I think it's almost a cry for help sometimes that they do it so publicly.
Yeah,
but that's fine, because I did some pretty public Facebook shit around December 2014. Don't go looking for it, everybody. It's a constant reminder. No, it wasn't bad, but it was like, oh my God, why was I sharing that? Well, because I was hurting, you know. So I think it's really important that you regulate it. Peace and love and nature may sound a bit hippie-ish, but it's lovely when you do go outside and detach yourself from it all,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we see it all the time online, people get trolled left, right and centre and stuff. But I think, there's been a few people that I've been influenced by, and they've all said, similar to you, it's like treat everyone with love and respect. And even if that does happen to you, just don't fight back, just go whatever. Well,
I have a thing where if anybody wants to take offence at something I say, I'm like, look, it's my beliefs. I'm not telling you you're wrong. I've got plenty of people who love me, love what I do, love the results I get professionally. They want to be around me. The world's a big enough place. Don't be bothered by me.
Fair enough. Absolutely, mate.
I ignore plenty of people.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I don't ignore all of them, but I practice what I preach. I very rarely get involved in arguments anymore. It's a road to stupidity.
Absolutely fair enough. Oh, something I forgot to ask you about as well. Dolby Atmos. Obviously, you're a huge Avid user. So, what's your thoughts on Dolby Atmos and what Apple have recently launched as well with spatial audio?
I think I'm a massive movie goer, so I think Atmos is awesome. And even back in the days of THX certified theaters and surround systems, I've always wanted that experience. I was lucky enough to go to Dolby in San Francisco. A friend of mine works there a few years ago, about 3 years ago maybe, and I went round all of the rooms, the music rooms, the theatrical rooms, and listened to a lot of stuff. My thoughts are that it is brilliant. I like the scalability of it. I remember the first time I saw it was at Dolby, or heard it was at Dolby Labs in Soho, and they showed how it would take the metadata and the objects and basically scale it to whatever the playback system is. I thought this is really clever because I can do a 5.1 mix, but the playback system will scale it to stereo or 7.1.2 or whatever the bigger versions are. What I find is, as with initially most technologies, people get excited and overuse it. Now, in the film world, I think going to see Avengers Endgame, brilliant.
Yeah.
But even just putting Hans Zimmer's score from Interstellar into a room and it enveloping you from above and around is equally as impressive, and yet there's no clever whiz bang stuff going on. So it's, to me, it's the solution that's looking for the problem. It's brilliant. It's now down to us to develop some really, really appropriate stuff. It's like doing 5.1 mixes of a live show. The final Black Sabbath show that I mixed, their final ever gig, was mixed in stereo. I did that for an album. That's when Pete Hewitt Dutton did the vinyl mastering for us.
Yeah. Awesome.
The cinema release was my 14 stereo stems broken out and panned out a bit round the theatre.
Yeah.
And we relied heavily on a 5.1, I was going to call it B&K, DPA array by front of house to pick up the ambience of the NEC, or whatever it's called now, the LG Arena, Genting, whatever. So that would have been horrendous to force 5.1 on that as a concept, because you're watching Sabbath playing a gig. A more technical thing, if it was a Roger Waters gig, that'll work perfectly in Atmos. So to me, it's opening the doors to some more dimensional stuff. One of the most impressive things I've heard is a recording of a choir in a cathedral that Focal used in their demonstration at NAMM last year. And it just had immense space, height, and an atmosphere. And it was one of those, when you switched off the ceiling array, you noticed it was gone. So it's more dimensional stuff. I think the old argument of like people can't set two speakers up and make them sound good is a little bit moot, because the more coverage you have, the more you can pinpoint. I know it's opening a massive can of worms for acoustics, but what some of the Atmos rigs that I've seen over again where Pete works at the bakeries on Sony Pictures Studio down near LAX, and we went into a couple of the Atmos rooms, and they're converted screening rooms, as is the bakery, and they've just got this little sort of scaff array or gantry, and the speakers are like they're as low as my ceiling. They're 8 foot down. It's a mini Atmos thing. But you get that spatial audio from it. So it's an interesting time. And what's really struck me is listening to lots and lots of podcasts is how they're actually using binaural for people to do ref proofs and approvals, because nobody's got Atmos rooms at home. Certainly directors don't. And, TV directors, they haven't got that. They haven't been able to go in because of the pandemic. They haven't been able to go into Atmos theatres. So the guys have been setting up at home with Atmos rigs and then sending out a binaural thing. And they've been going,
genius. Yeah,
that sounds good. Who'd have thought binaural? I mean, I thought that was dead.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. It's so clever. As I think, is it Steinberg? I think that's part of Nuendo with binaural that they've implemented it. And it's part of the package. And it's like, it's mind blowing. Again, it goes back to the fact of headphones. you know,
Yes.
and the fact that kids that want to try it out, you know, that have obviously got the budget, but kids that want to try this like Dolby Atmos stuff out can now do that as well, and that's mind blowing. The fact a
It
kid
is, and
can
it's all
do
going
it,
to
it's
be
brilliant.
it's all going to be down to how we find ways of doing it. It's like you almost go back to the plug-in thing of like what development when we were able to get the technology, like what Fab Filter. I mean, who came up with that EQ?
Yeah.
If there's two ways, and I will probably contradict myself in various chats with people, but if we're constantly remodeling the old shit, and I could say that I'm using the old techniques because I'm using tried and tested, and who's to say that that's still right in miking up something, but it's still a transducer in front of the sound source, so therefore there's probably not too many ways I can pick that up.
Yeah.
But if we're constantly remodeling or modeling old shit, then we're probably going back to Henry Ford. If he asked the people what they wanted, they'd have said a faster horse. So what we're up to now is we're up to, again, these new technologies have come along, and it's up to us to go, there you go, what can you do with it? Because people who aren't tethered by the old ideas are going to come up with ideas that they're not stuck, constricted by boundaries of preconception, are they?
No, not at
So
all.
it's exciting to see what people are likely to come up with.
Agreed. Absolutely agree. I think, though, when I was speaking to a couple of engineers, they said that I think, you know, kind of for a lot of bands, especially like, you know, younger bands that haven't got budget, people are probably still going to stay, a lot of bands still in stereo in reality. So maybe it might take a while to catch on. So I know that Apple have really been pushing it now with Zane Lowe in the interview. You've probably seen it with Sylvia Massey and a couple of other engineers as well. So it's really interesting that they're trying to bring it to the consumer market as well now. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with it.
I think the more subtle you do things, the better. I think certainly if in a straightforward trying to emulate what we do, I think it's a slightly disorienting experience having stuff flying around.
Yeah.
That was the thing that struck me mostly about the Atmos playbacks at Dolby in San Francisco, was they were forcing a lot. It doesn't make sense visual if there's no visual thing to say this is there. Certainly not in a conventional, let's call it a band style thing. But I think atmospheres are where you get the depth. That was the incredible thing. There was a guy there who it was gaming related. So they didn't get me to sign an NDA, so fuck it. But he was developing a system using open backed headphones. This is probably already out there. He had an Atmos rig in his work office.
Yeah.
But he was doing localized motion tracked headphone stuff. So all of the close sounds were being generated here, and then all of the atmospheres and the stuff that needed to be further away were further away.
That's brilliant.
And I had VR goggles on and a wand so that I could navigate through this fucking lava pit. Which he very humorously thought, what we're going to do is you should see the grid. It was all Tron. You should see the grid. Yes, I can see the grid. I'm going to put you into a lava pit and waterfall. And my first words were, "You fucker, why didn't you put me on the bridge? The bridge is 6 foot in front of me." And he went, "Just my little joke." But that was really cool, because that was great use. You know, this head tracking technology that like Waves are using with their NX stuff. All of that was brilliant. But then to have through the open back headphones, the distance stuff, it was like, actually, this is really cool. You know, we're still probably decades away from the holodeck on the Enterprise, but that's what I like. I like this breaking the boundaries. It's like, how far can you push stuff? Because, you know, you still think, oh, how can anybody break the 100 meters world record? I bet someone will.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so cool. No, Mike, thanks so much for that. So before you go today, any final words, anything else that you want to have a chat about that you can think of off the top of your head? And where's your journey going next as well, you know?
I'm just working on some really nice band projects again that are giving me an opportunity to help some younger bands along. So they're really good. They've got small label deals. They're very authentic, and they wanted to do it the way that I've done it with some of the heroes. So it's working really well because we're kind of just doing what we did on the big records, and they're blown away by the complete lack of being tethered to preconceptions. So they're all playing in rooms together. We're going for takes. I do everything I aim to do as much as possible with pre-production and playing live. It's not working on a couple of projects I'm doing. I'm working amazingly. I'm doing this. The band from Ukraine got in touch with me. That's having to be done remotely. So that will probably be, that's a bit of remote production and mainly mixing. But I've had a really nice international thing going on over the last 12 months, mixing for some great people. And I'm just enjoying finding other stuff and being allowed to sort of just get on with not just heavy metal all the time, because much as it's lovely, I do love other stuff too. I'm involved in a bit of the education stuff. I also do. I'm currently involved with some great guy down the road who's a really, really nice songwriter. He built a beautiful studio a couple of years ago, and so I'm helping him out. I'm trying to give back as much as I can, hence wanting to do the mentoring thing. I still do lots of stuff with Tony. There's going to be projects in the offing. He's talked about them, so I'm not breaking any confidentiality. He's constantly working on things, and there's always something bubbling away with him. So I try to keep my life a little bit, just interesting. I'm lucky that people find me, and I've got a couple of great friends who I'm helping with their studios. I mean, we have fun. It's been a tough time for a lot of places, but it hasn't been the death of the music industry. I'm really pleased to see that gigs are going to be opening up. People are getting on with it, and it's just I think it's really important that we keep music in our blood, because I think as a whole, it's become very devalued, massively devalued, and it's so important to all of us. And I think there's a certain amount of responsibility that needs to come from within to put value in music. I know too many people that just consider it a free resource, and it's not.
No.
It's the same thing. It's like when we've talked about spending money on professionals. Mastering isn't a fix for crap mixing, but it's a valuable part of a process that starts with paying professionals to do a job properly. And I think you've got to put value on yourself as a professional, and encourage people to spend money in the right places. People have always assumed that I'm too expensive and unattainable, and it's absolutely not the case. And I get very saddened when people come to me having had a crap experience with someone cheap, who didn't know what they were doing, who's forced them into a way of working, and ultimately really screwed up. Well, cost them a lot of money, not as much as they thought it would, because they went cheap. But there is value in actually going and working with people who've got experience, because ultimately you're going to get a proper job done, and you end up with something you actually dreamed of, rather than just saving money and getting a a crap, lesser experience, I should say. I love the big albums that I've worked on. I didn't work in the days of the $1 million budgets, but I worked on albums that we've got to spend 3 or 4 months on. And you can front load a project nowadays with a lot of pre-production and still get a similar experience of what it was like in the heyday. And who knows, that might come back. You know, we might actually get systems where people give a shit enough to want to pay for music again. Wouldn't that be nice?
Indeed. But it's just, oh man, it's crazy. I know it's an absolutely crazy time, especially with all the streaming services out there. And you know, maybe it's one of the greatest times for bands to release music because they can build their own fan base now. But like you said, you know, you got to be heard above the noise as well. So we need to really push those legends out there and those amazing bands. Like you said, you know, if someone's getting better, more experienced production as well, you know, and better mixers and better masters, then hopefully that will help them push past the crowd, you know, and get them to where they need to be.
Something that's talked about a lot with life coaches, and certainly I've touched a lot on that with the mental health stuff, but authenticity is a massive thing, and it goes hand in hand with that whole sheep mentality thing. You've got to have the belief in yourself to be authentic. People will spot it a mile off. People spot when you're just copying something. So if you've got courage in your own convictions and you believe in the stuff you're doing, that's all that matters. And then you can let the fans decide whether they like it, but you can't go second guessing what people want.
No, you're right.
One of the important things is, and it was something I listened to. I listened to a lot of audio books as well as podcasts. I listened to the Alicia Keys audio book, and she read that in her own words. And she very early on, her first album, she wanted to do a cover of a Prince song. So he invited her up to Minneapolis to perform for her at the studio. Yeah. And he went, absolutely, you can do one of my songs. You really, really mean it. I can see how much it meant to you to do this. She was shitting herself about this. And a few years later at one of her gigs, they were chatting after the gig, and he said, really been interesting looking at your audience and how they are and what they've developed from. And she was like, didn't quite know what he meant. And then he explained it, and he said, it took, when you got your first audience, nobody knew who you were. They loved you for what you did at that point. So that was the authentic Alicia Keys. Everything after that was that point of comparison again. It was like the people who didn't think she should have done her second album the way she did, that she may have picked people up on from the first album that didn't like the first album but liked the second one. So you've got this traveling journey of people that are going to either stick with you because they're diehard, or they're going to pick you up and put you down. I have the golden years of Rush. I have the golden years of Marillion, the golden years of Pink Floyd. You know, those are the years that I associate most of the years. Oddly enough, Dave Grohl didn't even really know that Sabbath had Ozzy before he found out eventually, because he grew up with the Dio years.
Wow.
So when you look at a career of 40 or 50 years, 20 years, you're going to pick people up and put them down. But the thing that you've got to do, and this is my big thing for the leave you with this, kids, is if you believe in what you're doing and you're authentic about it, nobody will ever be able to take that away from you. You're not chasing the trend, because that's probably what's got the fucking music business in the States in over here, is chasing trends. Because by the time Billie Eilish came out with her first single, she was already working on the next stuff that was her. And then you got every single fucker in the music industry going, we need you to do a record like Billie Eilish. I'm sorry, that's already been done. She's not even Billie Eilish now. So you've got to be authentic and believe in what you're doing, but definitely learn off good people. And if that involves going and paying to to record with someone great, even if you only do one project with them, guarantee you come out with a better understanding of it. And this isn't a pitch to be recording people, by the way. I just truly believe that
No,
it's
that's great,
getting
man.
lost. It's getting
awesome.
completely lost. So yeah,
Yeah,
very important. Choose someone that you really like, you know, that does what you like.
I just love the fact as well that you've still got that passion after all these years that you've been in the industry. And it's great talking to yourself and other pros as well that have been in the industry for a few decades now, that, you know, you've got that fire still within you and you're pushing the boundaries. And like you said, you're wanting to give back and support, you know, the next generation of engineers as well. And it's just so important that, you know, the torch gets passed on and it carries on as well.
Well, I've got 2 grown-up kids, I mean, 18 and 22, and, you know, I'm immensely proud of both of them. One's about to go off to university to do his dream of design, and the other one's doing lighting design in theatre and set design. And, I mean, he had the West End debut on Sunday night with the show that he's done.
Oh, wow.
And
cool.
So we're like, we live through that pride of what we're giving back. And I want anybody to, you know, anybody that works with either of my kids, I want them to be nurturing them. It's that entire thing of like, you only learn by actually doing it and surrounding yourself with people that inspired you. I had some brilliant mentors. I worked with some fucking fantastic people early on, and still, if I get a chance to engineer from someone, I will do it. Just to be that fly on the wall of what decision did they make? You know,
absolutely,
it's brilliant.
So good.
You've got to be inspired to do good work, and just take every opportunity you possibly can.
Absolutely. My son is almost 4, and he was watching a Foo Fighters video, and he literally turned around to me and went, "Daddy, can I play guitar?" I was like, "Yes, you can."
Yes, absolutely. But not the Les Paul.
No. Yeah. Oh, actually, I've not got it here, Mike, but the last thing I'll leave you with as well, I managed to find, I've never driven down a motorway so fast. This guy was literally, it was a snap neck guitar, but he fixed it, proper luthier. It was an Epiphone Les Paul Custom Pro, so they're about 600 quid. Nice. But you're selling it on Facebook for 60 quid. I've never driven so fast down the road to get this guitar, mate. But it was just, awesome. But, you know,
You know, if it inspires you as well. Andy Sneap always says a guitar's well worth the money you spend on it if you get one song out of it.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
That's the thing. And that was my point. Just going back quickly is if if you like using something and it inspires you to do it, then go for it.
Yeah.
But it's got to be that thing that's, you can't have excuses as to why you're not doing it, and it's perfectly fine to not feel creative.
Yeah.
But don't use not having something as an excuse to not not get on with it. So amazing. Here endeth my lecture.
Good man, brilliant.
Did I answer every question? Yes, I did. Yes, so. I am solely Pro Tools for my stuff, but I can dabble in Logic and all the other stuff if I need to jump in. But yeah, I'm mainly Pro Tools.
Amazing. I think someone mentioned about can't wait to work with you again when you come to Winchester.
Yes,
for the workshops.
We're actually we're doing a workshop to trial this mentoring thing. We're doing it in the summer. Winchester University. A friend of mine is he actually did his degree in I'm going to get it wrong now, but it was like the impact of technology in heavy metal production, and he's now a course leader. Professor at Winchester University, so he's invited us down to spend a week, kind of backfilling the students who really missed out last year on a lot of practical stuff. We said, right, let's just make a record for a week then, and we'll do it how I do it. And and it's lovely. I've for the first time in my entire career, since I've been freelance, I've actually also got a student from BIM assisting me, Jaden, on some projects, because she showed so much enthusiasm and love for doing this that I was like, why don't you come and just hang and work on some projects with me, because you'll not get a better grounding than actually being in the thick of working with some bands. And she's really just, it's given us so much confidence to be given that opportunity to just be in a real environment. So I think it's really important. That's why we decided to do the Winchester thing. It was a good thing to do. See how it goes, and then we're to say hopefully later in the year we'll be rolling out the actual full thing.
You might have come across Rob Tolson, I think, as well.
Yeah,
so
I know Rob. Yeah, the drum.
Yeah, great guy.
Yes, he was down at University of Westminster when I met him.
Ah, right, okay.
I think.
Yeah.
He's written a drum manual.
He has, recently.
I contributed some pearls of wisdom to that.
Brilliant. Oh,
I haven't read it yet. Yeah, Rob's great. Yeah, he's really cool.
Really good guy. Amazing. No, Mike, thank you so much for your time today, sir. It's really, really appreciated. Feel free to hang out for a couple of minutes afterwards after we go off air. So no, thank you, Mike. So thanks to everyone that's watched as well. Thank you. So if you've missed the interview with Mike today, you can catch up on YouTube, which is youtube.com/produce, mix, fix and conquer. So Mike's on our community as well, which is facebook.com/groups/produce, mix, fix and conquer. Mike, also, you do your interviews on recordproduction.com as well? Yeah. So definitely check that out as well if you've not done before. But Mike, thanks for your time today. It's been brilliant.
Pleasure. And thanks for all the good questions. And we'll be trolling you with loads of watch the reruns as well. So
amazing. Great stuff. Thanks again, Mike.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Cheers, everyone.
Thank you.